About 25 years ago, in 1985, a UN researcher, Essam El-Hanawi, wrote a paper in which he talked about the concern that he had for environmental refugees. From his perspective, he was concerned about people having to move because of changing environmental circumstances, resource scarcity, and so on. And before long, this issue became quite a hot topic. As we moved into the 1990s, people were writing quite a bit about this idea of climate refugees or environmental refugees, people having to move because of environmental circumstances. People having to move because of environmental factors is nothing new. It's been since the dawn of time. Nomadic peoples, people have always moved because of changes in the environment. In the United States in the 1930s, in the American Southwest, a combination of bad government policy and sheer venality and drought caused people to move westward and formed the heart of Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. But what's happening now is something different and something new. By now, I mean the last 25 years, there's been much more of an emphasis on climate refugees and climate migrants and people having to move because of anthropogenic climate change. Now, the thing about climate change is that it's been pretty well understood since the 19th century. But it wasn't until the 1980s that James Hansen, the NASA scientist, testified before Congress that climate change was occurring and that humans were contributing to it in very profound ways. So as we moved into the 1990s, these two tracks were in play. One was this emphasis on climate refugees or environmental refugees, people having to move because of environmental change. And the second was climate change and the ways in which humans were contributing to it. Before long, people began to offer really quite astounding estimates about the number of climate refugees that we might see moving out into the 2020s, 2030s, 2040. In the middle part of the last decade, about 2005 or so, what became especially striking is that defense and intelligence and security analysts started emphasizing very much climate change and climate refugees as a security issue. And so the Pentagon, intelligence think tanks in Washington, D.C., the Ministry of Defense in the United Kingdom, the European Commission of the European Union, all began to release reports about how climate change and climate migrants constituted a new security threat to basically North Atlantic interests, Europe and the United States. The 2003 Department of Defense, the Pentagon, borders need to be strengthened around the country to hold back unwanted starving immigrants from the Caribbean, Mexico, and South America. The Center for New American Security in 2007, along with Georgetown Center for Strategic International Studies, wrote that the scenarios are projected that rising sea levels and the associated disappearance of low-lying coastal lands could conceivably lead to massive migrations, potentially involving hundreds of millions. A combination of resource pressure, climate change, and the pursuit of economic advantage will stimulate rapid, large-scale shifts in population. In particular, sub-Saharan populations will be drawn towards the Mediterranean, Europe, and the Middle East. The big irony about all of this, from my perspective, is that most of the migrants that may emerge from climate change will actually remain in their country of origin. If they cross the border, they might go to a nearby city. They might go to a nearby capital. So when we think, for example, about Africa, West Africa and the part of Africa that's just below the Sahara, what's called the Sahel of Africa, people in those regions are not likely to move northward toward Europe. In fact, when drought or climate change occurs, or desertification, or the things that might make people move, it actually impedes people's ability to move. Demographers have shown this, and migration studies experts demonstrate that people are actually less inclined to move. So this whole concern about migrants streaming north and hordes of migrants coming up into advanced industrialized countries is I think, overstated. What really concerns me about this is that emphasizing climate refugees or climate-induced migration as a security concern is, in many ways, smart from a politician's perspective. It's politically successful. It appeals to people's worst fears about potential hordes of refugees streaming northward. But as a policy, it doesn't work very well at all. It doesn't solve the problems that may cause people to move in the first place. And in many instances, people will not be moving. They will be staying put. And what needs to be done instead is emphasizing ways to help them adapt to the challenges that climate change poses to their lives. Adaptation, for the longest time, was kind of a bad word in climate change circles because it was seen as kind of giving up the fight, that we're no longer going to work to mitigate greenhouse gases, but instead just sort of accept it and move toward adaptation. But again, there's already a bunch of climate change that's in the pipeline. Climate change is happening, and we need to move toward adaptation and helping people in developing countries, in Africa and Asia and Latin America, adapt to future climate change. And so I fear that by securitizing climate change as an issue and focusing on borders and militarized responses and patrolling the waters, it's going to take attention away from more energetic efforts to work on these other issues.